I've had the fortunate opportunity in my years in Boston to find myself moving back and forth between the arts and policymaking. And a lot of folks wonder what the connection is between the two. The arts, I think, are too often viewed as some sort of effete process outside of the grit of policymaking. And artists are often thought of as sort of removed from the nasty realities of community organizing and economic development. But in my experience, and it took even me a little bit of time to draw the direct connections, the arts and policymaking really engage individuals and communities in visualizing what we want the present and the future to be. And the disconnect that exists between the work and the lives of artists, working artists, and the work and the culture that goes on within communities often creates an artificial gap between what we think of when we think of the arts and what we think of when we think of how we go about improving and addressing root issues within our communities. So our organizers have put together a panel, and I'll have folks introduce themselves and their work in their own terms, because I think that's only the fair way for artists to be introduced. We have a panel that I think opens for us some very fundamental questions about the intersections between the arts and culture and identity on the one hand, and policy making and culture and identity on another. And so I'm going to jump right in and have our panelists introduce themselves. And then I hope we will have a very rich conversation about the future of the intersections between community development and the arts. And then I'll conclude with one or two comments about all of that. So to my right and left, your left, you're on.
Hi, thank you. Really is a pleasure to be here. My name is Jody Kipnis. I am the co-founder of the Holocaust Legacy Foundation, and right now we are in the process of creating and building Boston's first Holocaust museum, actually New England's only Holocaust museum, right on Boston's Freedom Trail, and we have a powerful view of the State House. So, you know, for me, I always thought that I understood the Holocaust until at a very young age, they were teaching Holocaust education. I would say preteen, I was maybe somewhere between 8 and 10 years old, and they were showing us black and white footage of liberation with emancipated bodies. So you can imagine as a very young student, it was really scary. And I became what I made up this term myself, a Holocaust avoider. I still have not seen Schindler's List, believe it or not. Had never walked into a Holocaust museum and avoided talking about it at all costs, until I had a life-changing experience in 2018, which I went with a Holocaust survivor and stood on the grounds of Auschwitz and just really could not believe what I was seeing there. And as when I came home, I really was not thinking about building a Holocaust museum, but I really started to understand that Holocaust education is so important, and it's not just about the images that we see. Holocaust education isn't just about the past. We really have to think about today when we're teaching about the Holocaust, because the lessons that we learned through the Holocaust is how quickly societies can change, how fragile democracy can be, and how quickly misinformation can spread throughout the society. So what we're looking to do that's very different in our museum is not just take the visitor through the linear path of the Holocaust, but thinking about society today and how we are learning so much differently than we learned back then. We don't want the experience to be a passive experience, but like as you go through history, we really want the visitors to have an interactive experience and really reflecting on themselves and who they will be. We want them coming into the museum as one person and reflecting on themselves and really leaving someone different, thinking differently. Not really telling the visitors how to think. We just want them to think deeper by bringing them through some really difficult conversations and questions that we ask throughout the museum. So really excited to be here and answer your questions and be with you today. And again, thank you for having me.
And if I can add one thing to that. When I was in law school, I was part of a law school film society that showed an Ophuls film called The Sorrow and the Pity, which interviewed a number of average French citizens seeking their comments on what they were experiencing and what they had done during the Holocaust. And I guess it was Hannah Arendt who said, who spoke to the way otherwise average caring people could overlook the horrors that were going on around them. And we showed it in the Film Society as an ethical challenge to the question of how evil can take place while the rest of us are complacent. And obviously that's a significant question for policymakers at this very moment. Anne?
Thank you. You want us to give our talk? Okay. Hi. My name is this on? Yep. Okay. My name's Anne Hawley. I'm Director Emerita of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and actually formerly did a startup and then ran a public agency before I went to the museum. And in that startup, I met Kitty Dukakis. I was 29 years old and trying to start a nonprofit working with performing arts and museums in Boston with funding from a foundation. And I was working away, and Kitty joined our board of advisors and taught me so much, because I had no idea at that point how what I was doing needed to be communicated to a larger public, the amazing networks and cellular structures of the city of Boston and who was what and whom. And she really mentored me and helped me develop leadership skills so sorely needed to pull this off. And in the process, we became friends, and because we shared some things in common, and I got to know her. She was an extraordinary human being, and many of the things that are happening today really stem from leadership that she provided back in the 80s and 90s and to early 2000s. She was an artist. I don't know how many of you know that, but she was a modern dancer. Her father was an extraordinary violinist and conductor, and she really, really understood what it meant to be a maker of art and what it meant to communicate that inner soul to a public. And because she had that incredible capacity in her art, she also was very, very committed to the fact that the arts should be a much more available and pervasive part of communities and people's lives, because for artists, and you can speak to this better than I, to be able to enter that transformative space where you forget yourself and you become connected to something so beyond you, whether it's a picture or a symphony or a dancer executing a movement, she knew that magic and how important it was for all people to be able to access that. And so she, knowing this as her armament, really, and her strength, she went forward as a leader in so many different spaces that you've been hearing about today and all these different panels. She had a natural leadership capacity, and then she honed it over the years. And when Michael became governor, she just knew how to get things done and how to take something that needed to be done. She could translate it into a larger vision and execute. And I just wanted to share some of the things that I worked on with her. She also, I understand that her son, John, described her this morning as having an incredible amount of impatience, and that was true. And so one of the things that we worked on, how many of you go to the Berkshires occasionally? Yeah. Well, back then, in the early 80s, when you went to the Berkshires, the exit off the Mass Turnpike was horrible, because you got off and there was this ugly exit and about 50 different signs of what you could find where, and it was total confusion. And the Arts Council that I was working with wanted to do a design project and make it a great the exit a great entry to the Berkshires, both from the New York side and the Massachusetts side. So we worked with a landscape architect named Volpe at UMass Amherst. You may know him. And he came up with a wonderful plan. We and also had met with people in Lee, the town that this comes out to get their input. And one of the major things that citizens wanted was to get rid of it. They called it the sea of signage that was there. So we came up with this great plan, and the Massachusetts Turnpike Authority said, absolutely no way. We don't want this. Get out of our way. And so I went to Kitty, and Kitty got a meeting with the head of the Turnpike Authority, whom I will not name because he's probably still living. And he took, reluctantly, a meeting with us. He was so enraged about the fact that someone would tread on his territory that he looked at the two of us and he said, all right, I'm going to do it, but now you can leave. And he got up and let us exit his office, but he grabbed me and held me back with his hand, and he looked at me and he said, I never want to see you again. That was my first project with Kitty. So another was Jacob's Pillow, which is also in the Berkshires. Jacob's Pillow is a historic dance program located in the hills around Becket, Massachusetts. It had an illustrious history with Ted Shawn, who was an early male dancer, ballet dancer in America, which was not an easy thing to do. And he had formed this as a summer place where many outstanding people came and did new work and tried out new things. But by the early 80s, it was about to go under, and it had just not had the right leadership, either its trustee or staff. And so Kitty decided it should be rescued. And she went to work recruiting new board members, trustees who could give. And I worked with her to get a new director, and we found this woman, Liz Thompson, who was a New Yorker, who was married to a dancer, Clive Thompson, with the Alvin Ailey Company, and who had a distinguished career. And Liz worked tirelessly. The pillow was turned around, it was saved, and then over time, I hope some of you have been there recently because it's just flourishing. But if it hadn't been for Kitty, it may have been nowhere today. And she was like that with so many organizations and so many people. She had such an eye for talent. She did not suffer fools at all. And she was one who really went after talent, which was how we got Liz. Finally, a couple other things. The Esplanade, I don't know how many of you notice the cherry trees every year on the Esplanade. Well, that was a Kitty project. She had a huge, which you probably know about, open space, public space project in which she worked to improve many parks and public spaces. And finally, just to mention the Massachusetts Cultural Council, which I directed in the 80s, when it was called the Massachusetts Council on the Arts and Humanities. That, again, today is a legacy of Kitty's because she put her shoulder to making sure that that little state agency that nobody cared about and nobody thought had any possibilities to really becoming a major player with amending, for example, the bonding authorities so that not only could the colleges and universities get bonding money, but so could museums and performing arts facilities, for example. And so it was, she just had a mind that was on fire and impatient to affect change in the area I knew so well, which was art and culture. And we're still today benefiting from that great contribution.
That's always the goal. I can use this one so we don't have to run so much risk of passing. And it's on already, actually, I think. My name is Heather Kaplow. I am a Boston-based and actually born and bred artist. And I'm here today because Kate Gilbert, who will talk to you next, invited me to do a project with the Boston Public Art Triennial. And I'm incredibly honored. It's like a huge public engagement piece with a sculptural element that we'll show you a peek of later. And I'll be giving a demo of it, the sort of engagement piece of it outside after this event. But I think just because I grew up here, Kitty was sort of a public figure in the world when I was a child. And the thing that stood out to me most about her compared to the other public figures I had exposure to was that her humanness was really foregrounded. And I hadn't seen that before. So maybe also a powerful leader, but like leadership is visible in a lot of places. Being human while leading was less visible in those days. So I think I'll leave it at that for now.
I'll use the one that's on. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Gilbert. I'm an artist. So, Ted, thank you for allowing us to put that forward. Most people are like, really? Like, yeah, I'm still making weird stuff in a studio. It gets harder and harder. But my approach to life is through how I see and observe. And over a career of over 25 years here, it's gone from being very quiet in a studio to using the city as a canvas. So about 11 years ago, out of great frustration, I am also a very impatient person, great frustration around like, where's the public art in the city? Why isn't this happening more quickly? We have lots of money here. There's lots of innovation. Why aren't our public streets and sidewalks and public spaces looking like the rest of us? We are such a international city now. People stay after they come to school here. So 11 years ago, I started something called Now and There, now temporary, there, site-specific public art. And I had, prior to that, worked for the Rose Kennedy Greenway as one of the first 7 women there to figure out how we were going to program this space. I met Ted back at the Boston Society of Architects when everyone was looking at what would this space be when we took down the highway. And so I had the networks and the connections, and I wrote down something that Sherry said earlier at the last panel about social engineering. So, I had all these things and the great frustration, but I didn't really know how to put it together. So in the past 11 years, we've really just been experimenting. We've been using temporary public art, and that ranges from clouds, 13-foot clouds, and a gate with St. Pete standing there, Pete, head of security, standing there for you, to the first Joy Parade in Boston with Nick Cave over 2.5 miles. We've hung things off of buildings. We've kind of done it all. I still really want to do the world's largest picnic, so hit me up if you want to do that, and you want to do permitting around that. But the most recent sort of coup that was really a citywide collective effort was the Boston Public Art Triennial. So we just closed that in October. It was a 6-month expression of public art. We had officially 20 projects, but there were a lot of sort of hidden and guerrilla pieces, and I hope every time we come back to do this every 3-year citywide expression, that will continue. We were looking at issues of indigeneity. We had pieces about climate. We had pieces that brought us just simply joy and celebration. My favorite, I have a lot of favorites, but in this crowd, you can know my favorite was we blew up a replica colonial ship on City Hall Plaza. So with fireworks and fire, a ring of fire, we had this great moment of decolonization and celebration. So I'm very honored to be holding this space as an artist, as someone who just sort of puts pieces together and hopes you guys we like it. And yeah, I think I'll just end it at that. And my mantra throughout this next 20 minutes or so will be about just doing it and making it temporary. It is a great way to build policy after something's already been sort of tested.
Hello, my name is Killian Mukwete. I am an assistant professor in the School of Architecture in KMD department here at Northeastern. I've been teaching here as an adjunct and then kind of gradually into a full-time position since 2015. And one of the things that I'm going to share, I think I'm first, I can see my slides there. One of the things I'm going to share is a way of working that over the time as a practicing architect and as an educator, I've kind of been experimenting with, and it's become a way of doing the work that I'm doing, which is how can we leverage community engagement as a tool for both working with community partners and also working with students and potentially connecting the three, right? The third one here being, facilitators that can make project, become real. So one of the projects that I'm going to share, I think it's a small project, but it's one that really came out well in that opportunity for engaging communities, engaging students with communities, and then engaging other community partners in supporting what community partners in the ground in Roxbury were trying to achieve. So yeah, I'm going to stop there, and then I'll share a little bit more on my slides on that particular project.
So, Kitty was a visionary who saw the arts as integral to the way communities could come together. And I'd like each of you to make a comment on your own vision of the role that you and the arts can play in terms of addressing some of the key policy issues that the country and this region face at this moment. And we have plenty of mics.
Well, I'll start, except I don't want to drop another mic. Is this one on? No, but there's no. I think that is this on? Okay. I think that the young children in elementary, and in secondary schools should be getting a more profound opportunity to explore an art form in their education. I think this repeated beat on STEM education really disenfranchises them from much larger capacities that they have inside of them to think and dream and express. And the the public policy is so limp now in terms of any kind of affirmation of this as an important part of being a human being. And I think tackling that could go a long way towards dealing with our horrendous social climate right now.
I'll take it next. So first, I just want to say to Kate, I will help you with that. I know a lot about permitting, believe me. And it has not been fun, but I'm always up for another challenge. So, when we think about, as I talked about, like some of the lessons of there's many lessons of the Holocaust, and we think about these younger audiences and the community at large coming in, our target audience will not just be tourists and young people, but also we're thinking about our local community. And, when we think about some of those lessons, of the Holocaust, we really think about, what is it, the story that we want to tell? And it's really about human dignity when we think about it. When I start talking about democracy, I have to tell you, it's one of our core themes in the museum. And the first thing I get is, well, are you taking a political stance? And I say, no. This isn't about, any one politics, any one generation. It's really about being human. And, teaching about belonging, to a society, and also learning about what people are capable of doing to each other. What are our responsibilities to each other? What are the police? We think about law enforcement. What are their responsibilities to their community? When we look back at the history of the Holocaust, neighbors, the way neighbors are with how and just people were just so complicit to the laws, and instead of helping their neighbors. And I'm not going to say that all were like that. We then do. Our museum is not just about history, it's about action. And we also talk about moral courage. It's also a really big underlying theme, and really making sure the visitor does leave empowered. As I said, we don't want it just to be a linear path through the Holocaust. We want to invite the visitors into the difficult questions, thinking about them as well. So, the museum is beyond just Jewish history. It's about human history. And we talk about the diverse communities throughout the museum. And we want to really go beyond just, like, as I said, just thinking about, who are our tourists, who are our school groups, but really making sure the entire local community also feels part of what we're doing, because those conversations need to be about identity and prejudice and civic responsibility, because we all have a shared humanity.
Yeah, I think from my perspective and from the project that I'm going to share with students and working with communities, I think the most important thing that I can share in that is a lot of ground-up community neighborhood associations that work day in, day out in these neighborhoods that are disadvantaged, that are underdeveloped, often find themselves with problems they're trying to solve, like, for example, in Roxbury, where they are seeing a disappearance of open spaces, and they don't have the means in order to do feasibility studies, in order to, and those feasibility studies, you need them in order to get funding, in order to implement. So I think from my perspective and from the work that I've been doing is, how can we bring the expertise that we have in education, bring the expertise that we have in students that we're working with, and establish collaborations with these ground-up communities that are trying to solve these problems. In Roxbury, it was Neighborhood Path Forward Association, and they were trying to preserve a space that was a space where the Black Panther used to provide their services. And this was in danger of being turned over to developers, and they wanted to preserve it. So the collaboration that we established in this case was how could we, working with that neighborhood association, work with the city, and work with other professional organizations to help them produce information they need to advocate for that space to be preserved. And beyond that, work with them as well to help them advocate to get funding through the city. And thankfully, in this instance, the city was able to actually find 25,000 somewhere, which went a long way to actually make the installation possible. So anyway, the point that I'm trying to make here is that I think usually there are projects that can be made at a big scale where there's a big budget and it takes years to be implemented. But on the other end, where you have groups and communities that are trying to do the day-to-day things that they're advocating for their neighborhood, how can institutions that have knowledge, that have young ideas, form these partnerships that can not wait for money to be available from the city in big budgets, but also just really provide the needed services that these groups are looking at. So I know I'm rambling there, but I think there is opportunities for collaborative work that can leverage engagement and that can become then a vehicle to empowering these local groups that are looking to solve problems in their neighborhoods.
You know, in our work, we follow the artist first, and artists are looking at every one of these policies that we all want to change. So I can't point to one. I'm going to sort of point to all of them, and through that, through trusting artists, supporting vision, you know, putting real money and collaborative effort behind it, those artists can then, with community, find the things that they really want to change. I think the sum of all of this is helping people feel seen and safe in public space, and that is getting more and more uncertain these days. And you know, when we started the organization, we had a slogan: "I am the art, I am the public." You know, what happened to my agency within public space? It becomes much harder, especially in an urban setting like this. You know, I feel somewhat okay going into my neighborhood and sort of cleaning up, but I do feel like I need to like get someone's permission these days. So one of the projects that we did that's a sort of good case test study for all of this is Gabriel Sosa. He's a local artist. We found through community listening sessions that the Maverick Community Landing Center really wanted a piece of art. He went in, he listened, and they said, you know, we just want ways to distribute information. And so he created Enya Press. This press was used for little zines that kids were using and selling. Sometimes they were leaving them, distributing them on park benches. But they were also using it to distribute posters about ICE and what to do when you see ICE. They were distributing it around housing, a housing action that they were taking place. And I think that is the power of art, is just to be that like social lubricant, to again share with, you know, the policymakers of the world, to say this is what we collectively want.
Yeah, I'll take that. Very like 1 minute response. I think it's, in addition to social lubricant, it's also a destabilizing force in a good way that kind of reminds people that basically, I think the most important thing I can be doing as an artist in these times is a little bit teaching people how to think on their feet. So when you're exposed to an idea that doesn't sit right, you're sort of forced to break out of your, routine, I guess, routinized ways of looking at things. And that applies in both, the policies make assumptions, and part of an artist's work, I think, right now is really to make sure those assumptions don't get too entrenched before people have to use them, start using them.
Within our broader society, artificial intelligence has become the major trend for investing and transforming teaching and curricula and what have you. And I'm very curious as to what you envision the intersection of your art making and community building will be in the context of artificial intelligence, which tends to be perceived as individualized and kind of idiosyncratic in its own way, but not necessarily a part of community building, which is what you've talked about. So could you comment on AI and what you envision the future of AI will be in terms of supporting community building through the arts? Just a small question.
I think that's for you, Kate. Why me?
It's funny because I was just having lunch with someone today, and we were talking about this. You'd think I'd be a little bit more ready for the question. We were actually talking about if AI can. The idea was that AI has seen everything, and therefore can sort of make everything it's seen. And a visual artist, for instance, has sort of seen as much as they've seen and can make things. So can AI make more? And the conversation we were having was about soul, right? Like that thing that resonates in us. And sometimes some people are up here and some people are more chill. And it might be spirituality. It might be just the way your cells are arranged. Does AI have that? And it kind of came back around to this conversation of right now it's up to us, those people that have all the different vibrations or however you want to put that together, to make the policy to ensure that AI is being used in a collaborative, safe way.
Killian, I understand you have a whole slide deck on this.
Oh, not on AI, but I can talk a little bit about, maybe not related to the slide that I have, but I do think that AI does have opportunities in helping community groups to do some of the work that typically they would struggle to do. For an example, the project that I will show on the slides, one of the aspects of it, the community wanted to create a database of all of the images and like historical images and work that the Black Panther Boston chapter did. And there's a lot of this that sits in different parts and different universities that is spread apart. So one of the tasks that they asked us to do is, can we help them collate all of this work so that it can be connected to this art installation that I'm going to show in a minute. And we had to work with students to do that, right? And this was before, because this project was done like end of 2020. This was before AI could really have its feet. So a simple thing like that, which is just collating information, collating data and aggregating that. I think these days with AI, that should not be something that becomes impossible for a community group to do. So my hope will be that the tools that AI have, if they can be accessible to groups to be able to kind of aggregate and look at their community assets in a database that they can own, that would be a helpful way of using and leveraging AI, especially in a kind of cultural assets building way. So anyway, I can go
let's
through some
take a look
slides
at it
quickly, but this is not AI. But so I'm going to go through a quick set of slides on a project that I worked with students, and I mentioned that part of my work is collaborative. This is a project that I had worked with students at Mass Art where I used to teach, and is also a result of a long-term relationship with a community organization, neighborhood association in Roxbury called Path Forward Neighborhood Association. And that also involved students. And then ultimately the city got involved. And essentially the summary of it is that this is an installation that commemorated the legacy of the Black Panther in Roxbury. And also it combined with a community garden that was a result of the advocacy that the Neighborhood Path Forward Association did in the neighborhood to prevent that plot from being kind of given away to developers. So this is an image of it, and this is kind of the end. This is an image of it as a community garden during the opening day, which was really nice summer day as well. But again, I want to kind of underscore that it's a collaborative effort. And it's one of those where usually when you teach and you have place-based teaching with communities, what we lack is an implementation. And this is one way we were lucky enough to actually work with students, work with communities, and actually implement something in the end that I will show in a minute. I'll skip through some of these slides, but I think the earlier conversations about issues of underdevelopment in Boston, I won't get into this, but I mean, it's well established that neighborhoods, especially that are part of Roxbury, they suffer from underdevelopment that shows things of poverty and lack of access to finances and lack of owner occupation of homes and housing. I think this was part of the conversation earlier on. And so this work that we did, or this installation that we did, is really the work of what this community partner does in the neighborhood. They advocate for housing in their neighborhood, they advocate for protection of green spaces, they advocate for protecting the heritage sites that they have on the site, and therefore our role was really to facilitate what they do. And so I think I want to also underscore that part of what we did in this was not to come in and say, this is what you have to do, was to partner with a partner that was already doing, advocating for this work. And obviously, some of the things that we are grappling with today, which is, access to healthcare, education, and community youth development, these are all areas that the Black Panther and the kind of social programs used to advocate way back then. So essentially what Neighborhood Association wanted to do was that this is a legacy that they wanted to protect on that site, because the services that were provided on that site that legacy was going to disappear if the site was going to be given away to housing or something like that. So part of what we did earlier on was to explore how the collaboration should happen, meaning that instead of us coming in and say we're going to design this thing and you build it, was how can we facilitate what they're already doing. So this idea of identifying ourselves where we sit and making sure that the community partners were the one at the center of the project. And also being open and transparent with them that without funding, it's also just going to be one of those reports that it collects dust and nothing happens. And luckily at that time, they also were able to use the information that we produced to get funding. And the goals really were simple. There were two goals. One, they wanted to collate all the information that the Black Panther had done and was kind of relevant around the work they did in Boston and create an archive. And two, could there be an installation that could be made on that site to commemorate the legacy of what they did on that site? And this was during the pandemic, and this is a little image of the site. This was the fence. There's a fence that was installed on the site, and they wanted to use that fence as almost like as a billboard that can talk about what the Black Panther did. And we're doing all this design engagement with this organization during the pandemic, obviously doing screen shares. I like that image on the left there because that's an image that we're actually working with them via Zoom to try and translate some of the ideas, what they wanted to see. So one of the things was that they wanted the fence to be a billboard that can broadcast that legacy of what the Black Panther did. And in the end, we did quite a few design iterations of what this could be, which started with this fence being a billboard to something of a gateway to something of a gateway that does not really block the view into the garden. And also, again, that image on the top left is an image that was actually submitted and selected by a community member that they liked what it did and what it looked and felt like, and that became the basis for how the design of the mural actually evolved. And working with students, this is an image that one of our students actually produced as one way of trying to communicate what this final thing might look like, which again, I saw an image earlier regarding what kind of imagery can we use when you're working with community engagement. This was one where they were able to see where the gateway was going to be, the 10-point program was going to be displayed as part of the community garden, and that what was able to receive funding in order to implement. And working in another collaborative way to fabricate once we got funding from the city, to fabricate what this gateway was going to look like and install it. We partnered with a friend of mine who is a fabricator in metalwork in order to be able to make this installation and also work with students. We worked with students during the summer to actually go and install. And Lorraine Wheeler, who is on this picture here in the middle, she was the kind of leader of this advocacy through the Path Forward Neighborhood Association. And they were also they brought the community as part of that participatory process of installing during the day of installation. And then this is the mural on the gateway. And again, as I mentioned, it's a part of a garden. It's not just a mural, it's a part of a garden which ultimately the community convinced the city to be able to fund as a way of, again, it addresses the issues of food security and other things that they're advocating for in the community. We also had students that I was working with collaborating actually the making of the garden. This is a group of students volunteering with the Red Sox. The Red Sox actually volunteered on this as well during the day that the garden was being made. And then overall, I think this was the opening day where the community garden was being opened, the mural being opened. Part of this, as I mentioned, was this idea of collating the imagery and photos and information about the Black Panther, and worked with students again to mount an exhibition, a community exhibition, which was to showcase and share the information we were able to find. And all of this was kind of curated and put together by students in partnership with the community. And I will end here that I think, actually I have one more slide. I think, again, this was an opportunity for students to be able to meet the community and showcase the work that they've done, and also the community to be able to share some of the stories that they had. And at the particular event, we also were able to connect to community members who had memorabilia and pictures that they wanted to share as part of this archive to be documented. And so I think this idea of leveraging engagement and partnership with educational institutions, communities, and funders is something that I did not only do in Roxbury, I continue to do in collaboration with the community in the North End, where I've worked with them since 2019 to advocate for protecting and preservation of the Nazaro Center into a community center that should not be turned into housing. And also work that I've done in the past in Haiti, where the idea of engaging with community partners becomes like a process of work and also a process of empowering local communities. And lastly, my current project that I'm working on in Benin, in Africa, again, leverages the same idea that, over in Benin, we're looking at protecting building heritage, but the process is kind of really the same. Like who in the community, who are the partners in the community? Could we engage with who are doing this work? And what does that partnership look like? So anyway, I will end here with just sharing that I think from my standpoint of view as an educator and as a practitioner, this opportunity to kind of connect institutions, communities, and municipal work and even funders in a collaborative work could offer and support local groups to be able to kind of improve their neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we transition to our student awards, are there comments or examples of work? Chris?
I'm sure I was going to ask a question.
Or questions?
Can everybody hear me? Okay. So, you need a mic. Here. All right. Actually, I'll just keep it simple. So, in Boston, there's a lot of pride in Boston about its arts and music, cultural scene, although, and of course, a lot of that pride is in long-established institutions. And then there's a sort of perceived gap. And obviously, several of you are trying to address that gap, because the gap is that a lot of those great institutions, I will not name them, but we're along the Avenue of the Arts here, so we all know who they are, seem remote from a lot of the residents of the city. So they have their own issues, but all of you seem to be working in areas that are trying to bridge those gaps. So just a quick question in this respect is there a city in the United States that you look at? I'm not going to ask about a city in Europe. A city in the United States that you look at and say, they're doing a good job of getting the arts out and incorporating the arts as part of city life in a way that people see as legitimate. Is there a city that's doing that in this country, and that Boston could do more like that city? Tough question, I admit.
Take that.
I actually have gotten this question a lot, and I don't think it's fair to compare Boston to another city unless we're looking at Philadelphia, because we are so old in comparison to all these other cities that can do this sort of middle ground. At a breakfast this morning, all of this prepared me for this panel, with an institution, one of these that you're talking about, that is struggling to bring in new audiences. We were talking about how in Europe it's okay to cleave off the front of the building and put a glass box. But I think in Boston we're still hanging on to a past, and we haven't quite figured out how to say, yes, it's been 150 years that this institution has been around, and maybe it's okay to change. So I think there's a lot of us that are saying, the triennial in particular, here's some temporary things we can do. It's not that scary, and it's this acculturation process. But I think in the words of the last panel, we've done big things here. We put a highway underground, and then every other city wanted to do it. We've cleaned up our harbor, so maybe we're the city that can do it that other people look to.
Oh, I just want to piggyback on that now that you say, so I also couldn't compare to another city, but I can tell you what we're doing is we're taking some risks, and I'm really glad the city's allowing us to do that. We're coming in with, when you said the glass box, we're coming in with the building will be wrapped in a beautiful glass white tile, and over that tile, I don't know if anybody knows where we are, but we are at the end of Park Street on the corner of Tremont and Hamilton, right where the Orpheum is. Very, very visible. I mean, Tremont Street's a one-way. Everybody sitting on Tremont Street all the way down to City Hall will actually see a rail car, a Nazi-era rail car enclosed in glass overhanging the building. You'll see it from the Freedom Trail side, and you'll also see it all the way down there. We plan to have it lit up at night, and as I said, we will be asking very difficult questions, and I think the city has been asking them, and they're ready to ask more. Because that's what young people want. They want these difficult questions. I really believe that. We have done so much research, not just on our own. We've hired so many consultants to come in and make sure that the risks that we are taking to dare to do something different, and we're hoping the other institutions will be ready to do that. I mean, we're exposing a Nazi-era rail car where from outside, the passers-by will watch the visitor inside walk onto the rail car and not exit, and working with the tour guides through Meet Boston and all the other companies, and not just to say, hey, there's the Holocaust Museum. Look, people are walking on the rail car. But what questions do we want them to ask? What do we want Paul Revere to ask on that Freedom Trail while he's waiting at the light to cross the street to go over to Park Street? They have plenty of time to do that. So I can at least speak for our institution. We are working with all of the institutions that are along that Freedom Trail, and they're very excited to see something new come and start to make some of those changes.
To your question, also, now that I've had a little time to think about it, there's a whole ecology for arts, and within that ecology, there's also, music and theater and dance, and so they're microcosms of ecology. And actually, I think Boston's is quite healthy. And so, for example, Kate mentions Philadelphia, which also has a lot going on in many different spheres. But in Boston, you have for just take music. Yes, there's the Boston Symphony, but there are literally hundreds of performing groups throughout the metropolitan area. And if any one night you can go to 5 or 6 different concerts, whether it's classical, jazz, pop, so, and the same with theater. There are so many young sort of pickup theaters that are performing. If you go to the Boston Center for the Arts on any night, there's a Black Box Theater there, and then there's the 3 Calderwood Theater. And so I think that the feeder to the big vaulted institutions is always on the ground. It's always the young startups, where the juice is, and what Kate is doing is absolutely phenomenal. It's where the juice is that's feeding the whole ecology. So I hear your complaint about the large old institutions, but those, even the Met in New York City, they didn't collect 20th century art until just recently they've started. So the old what do you call them? The sort of the big dogs in the room. They're always going to be big dogs, but they aren't going to innovate and lead in the way that what Kate is doing, or what the Somerville Theater Company that produced an incredible Magdalene performance the other night. So I think it's to that health that we really need to look. And what I'm concerned about with that is the aberration that's going on in terms of arts funding nationally from our endowments for the arts and the humanities is going to cripple that, I think, substantially, because they were feeding that.
I'll reinforce what Ann has said, and in terms of specific cities, other cities that I might compare us to, I would say Richmond, because of the mural project that has gone on there, that has done wonderful work in what is primarily a community of color. I would say Cincinnati, because of the work that the universities have done there. I would say us, of course. And I'd say, in the sense of long-term design, Paris, and also Venice, just because they are what they are, and they have found ways of integrating contemporary design and fashion and art into the fabric of what is, in each case, an older city that has integrated cutting-edge contemporary art, so that it's both about the artifact and the programming that supports the artifact, that makes you want to go to those places because there's a sense of art all around you. We are at our time, and we have some young people who are emerging, so.
But don't go anywhere yet, because I do want to give Heather the opportunity to show us or talk a little bit about what she has in store for us. And I just want to say, I can understand why Kitty really got into the arts. I don't think it's just because she was a dancer. I think it's because art kicks ass. I mean, like, artists say stuff that, like, other people cannot say. And she was a big fan, right, of saying things that other people could not say. So I am blown away by this final panel, and I think we gave it an appropriate place to, like, bring us home. But Heather, please tell us a little bit.
Yeah, I don't need to get up there to say it. I'll say it. I just want to, in response to your thing, I think the gap is a little bit invisible, too. It's not really a gap. It's full of stuff. Yeah, right. You just have to, like, be willing to walk away from the institution and spend time elsewhere. So this is a project that's coming soon to a city near you, this one. Many sites throughout this city. And it's a sort of meditation on grace, I think, giving each other grace, but also thinking about this in the context of the semi-quincentennial, which is upon us, and thinking about our imperfections, both individually as people and as a country, as we come upon that time, not just celebrating as we traditionally have. Oh, look at us, we've made it 250 years, but looking at the embedded flaws and weaknesses from the beginning all the way till now. But that's in the background. In the foreground is just an opportunity to get into heaven, and pretty much everyone gets in. And that's done through witnessing another person in their sort of self-exploration about their strengths and weaknesses or efforts to be their best selves. So it's called Better Angels. It's a slight reference to our friend Abraham Lincoln and his effort to bring the country, his failed effort to bring the country together on the eve of the Civil War. But it's also about our individual better angels. And I'm going to do a very simple, like dry run of the process with assistant angel Chip over there. And I was going to do it outside, but I actually think I'm going to commandeer this and do it up here while y'all have cake, and people can come here and then maneuver around, because it takes a little while with each person, and I don't know how many people will get through. So that's it. I hope that's everything. Yeah.
I love that. Fantastic. We do indeed have some student awards to do before we get to the cake. I know we're going to get there, I promise. But I first want to give a round of applause to our wonderful panel.